it's a journey, and that's what I tell everybody. Yes, I'd love you to be gluten-free, and I would like you to not even think of a gluten-free bread or think of
Yeah.
that vehicle in order. It becomes a little bit more either like your protein and your vegetables, or it becomes more of a soup, salad, stir fry bowl kind of life, it seems.
Yes.
My next guest is Whitney Morgan. Whitney is the founder of Morgan Nutrition, creator of the Thyroid Reboot Method, and the co founder of Functional Health Alliance. Whitney specializes in advanced functional testing and root cause healing for women with thyroid issues. She's helped dozens of women with Hashimoto's and hyperthyroidism eliminate their unique thyroid triggers and restore vibrant health. Whitney is a licensed acupuncturist, a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, a primal health coach, and a certified gluten-free health coach. In addition to her private practice, she serves as clinical advisor and instructor for the Association of Functional Diagnostic Nutrition Practitioners. Welcome, Whitney. I am looking so forward to our discussion on gluten today.
Me too, Debbie. And thank you so much for having me.
Yes, we are going to have a great discussion and educate a lot of people about gluten because
Mhm.
it is a huge, important topic in
Yes,
so many areas of health.
absolutely. I mean, sometimes I think it's the number one topic.
Okay. Well, I'm going to say
Yeah,
it's yeah, okay. And
yeah.
if I was going to give someone, I talk about a stronger bones lifestyle because it's a
Mhm.
lifestyle approach to health. Yes, I'm going to say that's the number one thing you have to do is give up gluten.
Absolutely. And mostly because if you don't do that, all the other things that you work so hard at changing in your life, don't make as much of an impact.
Yeah, it's so true. You have to remove triggers, and it's always hard
Mhm.
in the beginning, especially, I mean, I don't know how you feel when you start working with people. I don't like it to always be, okay, you got to give up this, 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 and this.
Right.
Yet you really do need to take away the irritants and the triggers. And in my case, with women with osteoporosis or any other metabolic issue they're trying to heal, you've got to take away the drivers of those
Yeah.
dysfunctions.
That's right. That's right. Otherwise, you're just swimming upstream against a really strong current. So you're never going to get anywhere, but you're going to be working really hard.
And that's probably where most people find themselves when they come to us, right? Taking
Yes.
shots in the dark
Mhm.
and looking for answers in all the maybe not wrong places, but looking for answers and not finding the answers. Okay, so
Yeah.
let's discuss gluten. I'd love for
Okay.
you to explain what is gluten and why is it not good for us.
Okay. That's a very broad stroke question. So when we think of gluten, the first thing we think of is wheat, but there are other gluten containing grains. So gluten itself is a large protein, and it's really impossible for anyone to handle it from a digestive point of view. We're not equipped for it. But that doesn't mean that it causes digestive distress in everyone, right? But it does cause digestive stress in the environment of the microbiome. Whether or not the person is aware of it, that's a different animal. Okay. So it causes inflammation in everybody. It causes a leaky gut in everyone. So gluten and some other foods too have the capacity to actually break down the gut lining. You can think of it as like punching holes, in the gut. So then we have leaky gut. And as you know, leaky gut is one of those critical dominoes, right? That when that falls, I mean, everything else systemically starts to go haywire. So gluten causes a leaky gut in everyone. Okay, so that puts everyone at increased risk of all kinds of health implications. But then gluten has some very unique properties. So, or I should say wheat in general. So there is a part of the plant that isn't technically gluten. It's a lectin. It's called wheat germ agglutinin. When it gets into the bloodstream, it can attach to almost every single tissue in the body, really all of them except two. Okay, so it's like the big bad of all of the plant lectins is found in wheat. And when it attaches to tissues where it doesn't belong, the immune system eventually sees it, and goes after it. And then as it goes after we call it WGA, as it goes after the WGA to destroy it, the surrounding tissue gets destroyed in the process. So now we have an autoimmune disorder, and that's what we call autoimmunity by collateral damage. Okay, so that's one really kind of scary thing, because it can happen anywhere in the body. Okay, and then the other thing is that there are particular peptides, or like think of them as puzzle pieces. Like if we take the gluten protein, which is a big clunky protein, and we break it apart into all of its puzzle pieces, right? These puzzle pieces are called peptides. And certain peptides have molecular mimicry with other tissues in our body. So there are certain parts of the gluten protein that when our immune system responds to them and makes antibodies to them, put us at higher risk for autoimmune disorders in the brain or in the thyroid, right? So for women, which, thyroid issues are almost more predominant than metabolic syndrome issues, right? Diabetes. So there is this molecular mimicry between part of the gluten protein and thyroid tissue, where the immune system looks at these two things and thinks they're the same thing. So if it's already gone after the gluten and tagged it as an enemy, which it will do, now it looks at the thyroid and goes, oh, wait a minute, you look exactly like that bad guy. You must be bad too. I'm going to go after you. Okay. It'll do that too in the brain, and it'll do it in a couple of other places. But the thyroid, it really has an affinity for the thyroid. That's why Hashimoto's is such a big deal, particularly in this country. So because it causes leaky gut, which automatically increases your risk of chronic illness and autoimmune disorders, and it contains certain puzzle pieces or parts of the plant that by themselves increase the risk of autoimmune disease, whether it's pretty much anywhere in the body or these very specific locations where there's a high affinity for the immune system of making a mistake. So anyone listening to this who has been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease should absolutely get tested for non-celiac gluten sensitivity and celiac disease. They're different, but both of them can wind you up in the same place.
Yeah, and you know what I noticed too from a symptomatic aspect. Yes, there's thyroid, and it's amazing to me working with women with osteoporosis how many of them also have thyroid issues. But the other area that I see from if we weren't testing, but you just wanted to kind of notice yourself, is joint inflammation.
Oh,
And
yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's the biggest area that most of the women, because I specialize in osteoporosis. You only do a DEXA scan every 2 years. And the
Mhm.
earliest you could really see a shift in density on a DEXA scan is a year. So these
Yeah.
are not ways to monitor the progress of what you're doing. The DEXA scan's not going to give you that. But what I notice is joint inflammation goes down. And so that's good because the autoimmune aspect of arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis,
Mhm.
is what can happen if there's that chronic over time and there's that wear and tear in the joint tissue.
Yeah.
So gluten, when you get rid of gluten, you get rid of pain in your joints. And
Yes.
with osteoporosis, the way that you make bone stronger is by pushing the joints into themselves or pulling on the bones at the joints. And you're not going to do that if you have painful
If you
joints,
have pain. That's
right?
right. That's
So
right. You're going to
yes,
move less. You're
you're
not
going
going
to
to
move less.
stimulate your body, right? Because you can't handle that pain.
Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so and then there's another component as well, right, where the gluten, what part of the gluten, one of the gluten peptides affects the CCK, the molecule in the bile, in the gallbladder.
Yes, yes. And the reason why I think the reason why that's so problematic is because the liver and the bile are essential, right? The liver and the gallbladder are essential, particularly when it comes to detoxification. That is the way we move most compounds through the body, whether they're toxins from the outside or toxins produced from the inside, right? Because we do have endogenous production of toxins, and we have to move these things out of the body. Well, one of the primary ways that movement happens is through the bile. So if anything is impairing bile flow, bile production, that starts to, it creates what I call like a sluggishness, right? Which means that your detoxification pathways are impaired. Okay, now when that happens, now you've got, and we're not just talking about, you know, when I talk to clients, sometimes they just imagine toxins moving through like in a liquid form. You know, it's like, oh, it's just going to get dumped from the liver and then into my small intestine and flow like a river out of my body. Well, no, we're talking about toxins that are actually moving through the cells themselves, right? And bile is a big part of that. Bile salts are a big part of that. So if there's sluggishness, what happens at the cellular level is that toxins start to build up inside the cell. And when that happens, you get this, well, what the cell ends up doing when toxins build up when they can't move through is that the cell, to save itself, will kind of backflush those toxins right back into the bloodstream, right? So they're not moving through the cell anymore. Now they're just collecting in there until the cell is under so much crisis that it goes, oh my God, we got to hit the emergency eject button and send it back where it came from. Well, those toxins are now like more potent, right, than they were the first time around. So you get, in a sense, what we call retoxification, or this bioaccumulation of toxicity, right? And that's primarily due to impaired liver and gallbladder function or bile function.
Yeah, and you're an acupuncturist, so that's definitely up your alley too, understanding liver and gallbladder, right?
Yeah.
Well, and with bone health, there's four musketeers, like the tippy
Ooh, I love
top.
that.
They're called the four I call them the four musketeers.
It's
You've got
great.
calcium,
Hmm.
99% in your bones. You have vitamin D, which
Hmm.
helps it get absorbed into your body
Sure.
from your diet. Vitamin K, wait,
Okay.
sorry, magnesium puts it into solution, and vitamin K cross links it into the bones.
Right.
Vitamin D and vitamin K are fat soluble vitamins.
That's right.
So you need that bile, not
That's
only just
right.
for the detoxification, but you also need it to mycelate the
Hmm.
vitamins that are in the foods that you're eating or in
That's
the
right.
expensive supplements you're
Supplements
taking,
you're taking. That's right.
right? So
That's right. Yeah.
this is you know, it women were come to me with, I don't know about you, but I like they're on 15 or 20 supplements, taking
Mhm.
shots in the dark, like I need this, I need this, I need this. It's like, okay, you're all that money you're wasting. Because if
Yeah.
you're eating gluten and you're toxic and you're not breaking it down and, you know, mycelating it as it's called, then you're not even absorbing it. We're not what we
Absorbing it.
eat,
Yeah.
we are what we absorb.
That's right. That's right. And gluten really impairs digestion and absorption on different levels, right? For pretty much everyone. And because it creates such kind of a hostile, inflammatory environment in the gut, and it's an immune, provocation every time it enters the system. It's a pretty powerful immune agent. So yeah, I think it's the number one. I mean, if there was anything, someone said there's just one thing to do to improve my health, that would be the number one thing to do.
That's what I would say, and you're a
Yeah.
thyroid specialist, and
Hmm.
I know for thyroid, that's definitely a thing. I'm gonna say the same thing for bone health. It's the number one, and even
Hmm.
for myself, because diet's not always easy. It's the hardest thing that
Yeah.
people have, when they have to make shifts. It's really the hardest thing, and
Yes.
even when I'm out there in the world or traveling or doing whatever, and if you're faced with decisions and it's not always easy to stay on course, where I do stay on course and have really since I started my training as a functional health coach really is with gluten. I
Yeah.
see it as such an enemy.
Hmm.
Um, you know, and I always tell people this. Do you remember making bank paper mache?
Yeah.
You make paper mache, you make a bank. Well, I would make you put it on a balloon and then you would pop
That's
it. You
right.
make a piggy bank, right? If
Yeah.
you think about it, we're making glue. We're
Hmm.
mixing flour and water, which becomes this glue, sticky substance. Well, that's going to coat everything inside.
Hmm.
How can things absorb and how can things
Yeah.
flow when we're bringing in glue?
Yeah, that's a really good image. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And also what a lot of people don't realize too is that, they think, "Oh, I don't have a problem with gluten because I eat it and I feel fine." Right? Well, Gluten actually, I mean, yeah, can it give you gas and bloating and constipation and diarrhea and stomach upset? Sure, it can do that. But it actually impacts the brain more than it does the gut. So anyone who has anxiety or panic or depression or any sort of mood instability, that could be the number one sign for you of how your gluten sensitivity is manifesting. So whenever I have a client come to me saying, "Oh, I have anxiety," it's like, "Oh, okay. Well, we got to look at this because it's a really common symptom of gluten sensitivity."
So interesting. I was just in my course. I check in every 2 months with my clients in this group
Mhm.
course I have. And I met with two women in particular. And I know that one of them struggles with anxiety. It's part of what she said when we first met. The lightness in her personality, the using the word I have control,
Yeah,
and seeing her and just the smiles and the giggles that weren't there in the beginning.
yeah.
And so, yes, the whole mental, emotional, the mood that was lifting, in addition
Mhm.
to all the other positive things she was seeing. So, and partly that is also because those neurotransmitters are metabolized in our gut, right?
Yeah,
The
that's right.
serotonin. And so, you know, it's all related. The gut brain connection, and
Yeah.
I go a little farther and I say the gut brain bone connection because I'm so
Mhm.
focused on that last part of the bones.
Sure.
But yeah, it's
Sure.
every facet of our lives that are affected. And so um, being healthy is multiple facets. And then you were saying that about symptoms, and that's another thing that I notice. I have some ladies that are really amazing. I call them poster childs, where they are actually doing the best that they can do with the knowledge that they have, right? They're taking their
Mhm.
vitamin D, their calcium, their magnesium. They might have started adding MK7 and MK4 vitamin K because they now
Yeah.
know that MK4 plays a role. And
Mhm.
so they're really doing good. And then, of course, they've got all the other things they're taking.
Yeah.
Um, and they're doing all of this. And then I'll run a stool lab on them or a hair mineral. And I'll see things and they'll say, and they might not be symptomatic. They don't have gas or bloating.
Mhm.
And then they're not, there are the symptoms they're not thinking, like you're talking about with mental emotional. But one lady said to me, wow, I feel great. And in her stool, I found H. pylori and even candida, which doesn't show
Mhm.
up often in a stool lab,
Yeah.
and impaired digestion and blah. She goes, wow, I don't feel like I have any symptoms. And then I say, well, osteoporosis is a pretty big symptom. And
Yes.
so
Yes.
anxiety, joint discomfort, thyroid issues, osteoporosis, all of these are symptoms.
Brain fog.
Brain fog.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
cognitive decline is
That's
one
right.
that it's overtaken cancer fear.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
I,
true.
yeah, don't you remember? Like we'd hear the statistic, 1 out of 10 women has breast cancer, and then it went up to 1 out of 8, and breast cancer was always like, oh my gosh, that was like the big fear.
Mhm.
Now it's dementia and
Yeah.
Alzheimer's and
Yeah.
cognitive decline, and
Yeah.
gluten is going to also contribute to that.
Well, and yeah, and then we have the added complication of at least the wheat in this country is predominantly flash dried with glyphosate. So they've done studies where if you combine gluten in the gut with glyphosate, that process of gut damage, it goes, I mean, it's like supersizing it, right? It's on steroids now. It's far more damaging more quickly, more severely, than it would be if it was just plain old wheat with no glyphosate, right? So we've got this synergy between two poisons that when we put them together become kind of a super monster, right? Much more powerful, much more evil than either of them can be on their own. And all of that goes on in the gut. And for the person who's experiencing it, the average person who is consuming gluten, they're consuming gluten all day long. They might not know it, but they are, because gluten is pervasive, it's in everything. So it's a constant drip, 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 drip. So their gut is always in this state of alarm and a certain level of damage and degradation that's gone on. So the things that people start to normalize, like oh, I have energy crashes, or I hit the wall and I just past 2 o'clock, I just can't think anymore and I struggle, I can't get through work, or I'm super irritable, or I'm getting tension headaches all the time. Oh, that's because I just live a stressful life, or, I mean, or like the joint pain, right? And constipation and things like that. I mean, there's all these little things that we start to normalize, or we're told, well, that just happens when you get older. That's part of the aging process. And I know women who come to me hear that a lot, not just from the people around them, friends and family, but from their physicians, right? It's like, oh, well, you're over 40. It's like, oh, okay. No one told me when I was over 40, I was going to have this laundry list of symptoms. But we're given this message that these things are normal and to be expected, but they're not. They're not. And we can eliminate 80 to 90% of those things through nutrition alone. Not just what we eliminate, but also what we add in terms of, opting for those truly nutrient dense foods that are properly prepared. And we're being mindful about how we prepare them, how we eat, in what mood, right? Making sure that we're not stressed out, making sure we're chewing our food and all those things. It's those little simple things that are so powerful. But in today's culture, so many of us have been programmed to look for that pill, right? Whether it's a pharmaceutical or a supplement or a magic detox program, whatever it is, that's the fix, right? When actually, no, that's like the icing on the cake, right? But icing by itself doesn't really get you anywhere. You need the cake. The cake is all about, well, cake is probably a bad analogy,
Gluten-free
but
cake,
gluten-free
Whitney.
cake. Yeah. But you need the nutrition and lifestyle stuff, and most of it is nutrition.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that for you as well, when you start to make the or suggest those shifts, the first things, like the very first things that start happening in my population I work with is improved digestion and elimination.
Yeah.
So constipation goes out the door, which means you're a flowing system.
Mm-hmm.
Energy increases, and then
Yes.
eventually joint pain. So inflammation lowers.
Yeah.
But
And
we
sleep
see it,
improves.
and sleep improves.
Sleep
Yes.
improves. Yeah. People
And
don't
we
realize that either, that what we eat during the day really impacts the quality of our sleep.
Yeah, and the quality of our sleep matters because
Mhm.
what we know so far, there was a study that came out of the University of Pennsylvania within this last year that that's when the brain, uh, I guess, is it called the glyphoid system or the amyloid? It like
Yeah, it's
clears up.
where it flushes out toxins, basically. That it's a whole cleansing process.
Yeah, it's when it
Yeah.
cleanses. And then I've also heard too that it's when sleep is when we process our daily cortisol output, which is the number one stress hormone.
Hmm.
So very important, all of those. And it's everything. It's not just one thing. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's talk about something that I notice. I work with ladies that tell me that they've been gluten free for 15 years, 10 years,
Hmm.
12 years, whatever. And one of the labs that I run is a stool lab, and there's one gluten marker on there, one wheat mark,
Right.
right? There's a gliadin, an anti-gliadin that's on there.
Right.
And then, of course, if I run a Zoomer panel, which is all the polypeptides, then you see
Yes.
all of the different peptides that they're exposed to.
Right.
But can we talk about cross reactivity and how could somebody that is gluten free for 10 or 15 years still show a reaction in their immune system to gluten?
Sure. Well, here's the thing. Most people who are telling you they're gluten free for 10 or 15 years, they're not as gluten free as they think they are. Um, and the reason why that is, in my experience, is because they don't live in a gluten free house, and they haven't gone so far as to remove gluten and wheat from their personal care products, and they still dine out on a regular basis. So, we can't live in a bubble, right? I mean, I have celiac disease, and I know that I'm going to get micro exposures to gluten because I live life out in the world, right? As careful as I am. Um, so so I always just say, hey, we got to test it. We got to prove that you're as gluten-free as you think you are. And I run the Wheat Zoomer, and 99.9% of the time, these hardcore gluten-free people are like, oh my God, when it lights up, and it's like, oh, okay, not just IgG antibodies, which would be indicative of maybe you had an exposure in the past when you went to a restaurant. Okay. But IgA antibodies, which tell me, oh, you had an exposure within the 2 weeks of the blood draw. So I'm seeing both of these things. That's telling me you're consistently being exposed to gluten. It's somewhere. It's somewhere in your life. It's either in a restaurant you go to once a week, or it's in your house because your partner and your kids are still bringing gluten into the kitchen. You're sharing all the kitchen utensils and the cutting boards and all that kind of stuff, and you're getting these micro exposures. And then what you hear is, but wait a minute, I know when I've been glutened because this happens, and this happens, right? It's like, yeah, that's when you have an exposure that is big enough to elicit those symptoms. But you can have micro exposures and not be aware of it. The only evidence of it is what your immune system shows you, right? And that's in the data. So right now, there's no way for us to test an individual's particular sensitivity level to gluten. And that's another thing, most people who are dedicated to a gluten-free life are purchasing certified gluten-free foods and being super vigilant about that. And that's good. That's exactly what they should do. But that just means that, okay, it's less than most likely 10 parts per million. But like in Europe, the threshold is 5 parts per million to be certified gluten-free. Well, I don't know what my immune system how my immune system feels about 5 parts versus 10 parts, right? I don't know. So there's really no way to gauge, what really is your threshold of sensitivity. And there's also no way to gauge how much gluten does it take to elicit the symptom that you associate with being gluten, as opposed to how much gluten does it take to piss off your immune system. They can be two completely different thresholds. The dose makes the poison, right?
Yeah, dose dependent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, and of course there's the obvious gluten. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that what I always tell people as well as our Western way of living, and actually I'm going to even say worldwide because I travel a lot, it's everywhere. Pasta, pizza, sandwiches, cereals, it's such a staple. It's the easy things to make. And they are
Right.
actually processed foods.
Yes,
Even
they
people
are.
who think they're really eating healthy, and I don't know if you found this, but when I first suggest that people go gluten free, that's like a hurdle. And then
Yeah.
they'll be like, okay, so they'll get the gluten free bread. Maybe not always
Yes.
gluten certified with what you were just saying, but they'll go gluten free bread. Well, I did that initially as well until
Mm-hmm.
I started looking at the ingredients of
Yeah.
these gluten free breads, and then I saw things I couldn't pronounce. I
Yep.
saw things that I didn't like. And then I started to think like, I don't want to eat all of those things. And is that much rice flour good for me? Or that much
Right.
corn flour good for me?
And that's where cross reactivity comes in, because just like the immune system can mistake thyroid tissue for gluten, it can mistake corn for gluten, or rice, or millet, or cow dairy. Also baker's yeast and brewer's yeast, and even oats. So there is this cross reactive paradigm that is very common. And the unholy trinity that I see most often is corn, dairy, wheat. So if someone is lighting up as wheat and gluten sensitive, and I run a corn zoomer on them and a dairy zoomer, which is also looking at those peptide sensitivities, they're popping on those too. Right? Rice might still be okay for them. Millet might still be okay. Their immune system hasn't made that mistake yet. But there seems to be this, the predominant pattern, at least in my practice, and also as a clinical advisor, looking at Zoomers that a lot of other FDNs run, and come to me for help with the case and whatnot. That I see that pattern in all of their cases too. It's always wheat, corn, and dairy. So that can be tough, because it's one thing to tell someone you got to eliminate gluten and wheat forever. It's quite another when you say, oh, and by the way, Same thing for corn and cow dairy. Then it's just like, their whole world comes to a stop, right? That's a tough one.
It is, and you gotta go
Hmm.
bite-sized pieces, and I tell
Yeah,
people it's for me, it's been a journey. 2014 is when I started FDN, and it was give up all these things. So I
sure.
started to look for the alternative gluten things. I looked for alternative crackers, maybe cookies, cakes, bread, which I that was kind of like the process to do that.
Right.
Then the longer I go, I start to look at those things and all the ingredients and the chemicals, and then looking at this cross reactivity aspect. And so I see it as a journey. Some people are able to give up all of that, but to make our food every day for ourselves is hard. And if you've
Yeah.
been used to pastas and pizza and sandwiches, which are the quicker, easy to make food items or things that we're used to doing, then
Hmm.
you have to go, then it's a little bit more of it's a journey. And that's what I tell everybody. Yes, I'd love you to be gluten free, and I would like you to not even think of a gluten free bread or think of
Yeah.
that vehicle in order. It becomes a little bit more either like your protein and your vegetables, or it becomes more of a soup, salad, stir fry bowl kind of life, it seems.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
That's like
And
where the health is, it seems.
yeah, I agree. And I'm not a big fan of giving people a list of things to avoid. Um, and what I find in my practice is, really we're talking about a handful of things that are really messing with them, really just a handful. Um, because when someone has a lot of reactivity to other relatively healthy foods like carrots and bananas and whatever, right? Apples, that's usually more about their digestion and their leaky gut than it is about the food itself. But being sensitive to foods like corn and dairy and wheat, that's it. That's a different animal altogether. That is about the food. That's about its level of agitation to the immune system, right? Because it's happening at the level of the peptide. So, one of the best therapeutic diets I think that I use in my practice is the primal diet, primal or paleo diet, which removes all the grains. It removes the legumes. It really is focused on quality proteins and fruits and vegetables and moderate amounts of nuts and seeds and healthy oils. So you get rid of a lot of that processed crap, and it really cleans everything out. And there's such an abundance of resources and wonderful recipe books and all kinds of blog sites. I mean, you can literally Google any food you want and put the word paleo after it, and you'll get 10 or 15 recipes. I mean, there's no comfort food I haven't been able to recreate in a paleo fashion to be suitable and actually yummy and palatable. So to me, that gives folks something to move towards rather than something to run away from, if that makes sense, right? It's a psychological difference, but it's also kind of an entree into a new community, right? Because there is a big paleo primal community where people share their resources. There's a lot of recipes out there. There's a lot of podcasts and blogs, and so you can go to a lot of different places for inspiration and to feel like you're not alone. And I think that's really positive because most people who are working with folks like us is if all they're hearing is elimination, 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 and they don't have another kind of way of or another world to venture into, they're still kind of stuck in their own world. Well, everyone around them isn't doing what they're doing, right? So now they're isolated. They're the odd man out, right? Because their partners and their family members and their friends and their coworkers, they're all still living their same lives. Oh, now I'm the different one, and I'm all alone in this, right? But when you're moving towards a different type of community, like the paleo community, okay, well, now, I mean, I might not know all these people, they might not be my buddies, but I feel like I'm part of something that has a core, that has a support system. And that's valuable for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think that you talked about wheat, corn, and dairy. Those are
Hmm.
all subsidized. Those are all mass produced. Those are manipulated. There's just a lot to them. It's almost like we've turned all of those foods into Franken foods that our bodies just don't recognize. Um, and I think that that's a big part of it. What do you think about traveling? And people always talk about going to Europe. And you did
Yeah.
mention that the threshold for gluten free was a 5 versus 10, but people say that they don't have the same symptoms, right? But they
Mhm.
may have the deeper symptoms that we're speaking about. They're not, that might be that they're going
Right.
to affect those things. But do you think that there's a difference in the gluten products, like let's say in Europe?
Well, I think there is a structural difference in terms of the actual gluten content per gram, I guess you could say, right? I mean, the gluten we have here is like everything in America is a little bit more supersized, right? So yeah, it's more problematic for the gut. But when people are saying that they feel better, usually what that means, if you dig into what's behind that conclusion for them, is that they don't have the GI distress that they have when they eat it in the US. That's the big one. And then the next one is the fatigue, right? They don't have the fatigue and the gut symptoms that they notice when they eat gluten here. But that doesn't mean that the immune system isn't reacting. It doesn't mean that their autoimmune disease isn't progressing, right? So anyone with an autoimmune disorder, whether it's RA or MS or well, celiac knows better, but um, psoriasis, whatever it is, um, traveling in Europe is not a magical panacea. It's not like you just kind of get to eat all the wheat there and nothing's bad is going to happen. No, that's still going to complicate your autoimmune progression. Absolutely.
Yeah, but it's really interesting. It's an interesting thought that you're on vacation. You're in
Mhm.
Paris. You're at
Yeah,
the Eiffel Tower. You're eating a croissant. You're with friends. You're happy. You're slow. You're like actually to eat a croissant in Paris. I know that the times that I've done that, it's different than eating a croissant here because you're in the birthplace.
sure.
So you're more mindful and so all the other behaviors we talk about to support digestion, which
Hmm.
is going to help to break down the food in your mouth and
Oh,
all that.
yeah.
You're supporting digestion with all the other good eating behaviors. So maybe
That's
that's
right.
why that's that
That's
maybe that's
right.
why, right?
Just being in vacation mode of being happy and carefree and away from all of the environmental things that confirm the amount of stress you're used to on a daily basis. Sure, absolutely. I agree with you.
Yeah, so
Um,
gluten on vacation might not feel so bad. We don't know if
yes.
if it's doing all the deep damage though that it does. And I think that's what you really helped to raise our awareness to in the beginning of this. There is deep damage
Yeah,
done when you eat gluten. There is
that's right.
there's deep damage and that's what we're trying to say. And then when you keep that onslaught of damage for years and years throughout your life can contribute to osteoporosis, can
Hmm.
contribute to thyroid, to leaky gut, to chronic inflammation, to joint discomfort and pain, to all of these not great, for me there's 7 root causes
Yeah.
of bone loss and it just can contribute to so many of them.
Yes.
So when you're trying to be the best healthiest version of yourself, some of these habits are important. For me, dietarily, number one habit is no more gluten.
That's right. And travel, depending on where you go, is not that difficult. What I recommend my clients do is there's few services out there where you can get those travel cards that interpreter cards that you can hand to the wait staff and it says exactly what your diagnosis is. This person has celiac disease, these are the things I can't have. I took that to Greece with me and it was lovely. It was fantastic. It wasn't difficult to avoid wheat and gluten in Greece. And fortunately, they don't have any cow dairy over there. It's all goat, and my immune system is perfectly fine with goat dairy. So I had a lovely time. And I've heard from folks, other practitioners who've gone to Italy, that because the awareness in Italy is so good around celiac disease, even though it's a very kind of wheat based, we think of pasta, right? Um, It actually is very celiac friendly, so it's gluten-free friendly. Everyone has a keen awareness of it. I think where it is difficult, yeah, places like
Northern
Paris.
Europe, Northern
Yeah,
Europe, yeah.
yeah,
But think about it, in Italy, when you go to Italy, pasta is part of what the primary, part of the first course. Then there's the
yeah.
second course, which is the meat or the fish. We eat pasta as a primary.
Yes, we do.
So we eat more of it, and we've
Mhm.
eaten more of it for our whole lives and in
Yes.
everything, the breakfast, the lunch, the dinner. And that is part of the problem, and then also the way that we mass produce it and the glyphosate
Mhm.
that's in it and all the GMO modifications we've done, the hybridization of it. So it really is a Franken food that we created, and then we're
Yeah,
eating way too much of it. All
yeah.
right. Yes. So thank you, because this is when I tell everyone they have to give up gluten, I want them to have more information. I want to say, go listen to the podcast, listen to Whitney.
Mhm.
You've ran like hundreds, if not thousands, of Zoomers, and the wheat Zoomer, gold standard in finding
Yes.
reactivity from the immune system, breaking wheat down into every potential part that it could be broken down into, as the body would see it when it's
Mhm.
seen it, right? It doesn't see it as the whole protein, it sees it in its polypeptides, its
That's
parts,
right.
not in its whole. And the Vibrant Wellness Zoomer panel, the wheat Zoomer, looks at all the parts to see that.
That's right. It
And
also has an intestinal permeability panel inside of it. So you can see the extent of damage that you currently have in your gut, what type of damage it is, and to do some possible causes from that. That's really valuable information for clients to see. Not only am I gluten sensitive, but oh yeah, Whitney said it causes a leaky gut in everyone. And look, I've got one. Yeah, that it's pretty eye opening. The Wheat Zoomer also has two panels on it that screen for celiac disease. So it's a pretty comprehensive test and very reasonably priced.
yeah, so it's not Whitney says so, it's your immune system says
That's
so.
true. That's true. But I kind of I'm a broken record when it comes to this stuff. You know me. It's my little soapbox.
I know, but Whitney, I've become more soapbox with you. I used to think you were a
Good.
little militant when I first met you, and you're like, no gluten, they can't have gluten. And I'm like, oh my gosh. But
I am
honestly,
militant. I am.
and
And
so am I.
yes, I
It's like,
wear it
okay.
proud.
And I wear
Yeah.
it proud too, because if you have osteoporosis and you want to reverse your bone loss, you have to give up gluten.
That's right. And what really, and I know you've heard this from me over and over again. You're not gluten free if your house isn't gluten free. And I get so much pushback on that from folks. And I say, okay, just prove it. Let's run the test. It's simple. Let's just see how gluten free you are. And I mean the numbers don't lie, right? The data is real. I love data.
Whitney didn't say so, your immune system did.
That's right. That's right. Whitney's just a data nerd. That's all.
Yeah. All right, Whitney. Well, that's been great. The other thing is I want the listeners to know is that you do specialize in thyroid, and you
Yeah.
have programs specific to thyroid. So I'd like you to share with us your programs, give a little information, and then at the bottom of this podcast, we'll put links out to your programs. So I'd love ladies to
Sure.
reach out to you if they have thyroid issues.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, I specialize in thyroid issues, predominantly Hashimoto's. What many people don't realize is that 90% of hypothyroid cases in this country are actually Hashimoto's cases. They're just undiagnosed. It's one of the most underdiagnosed diseases, autoimmune diseases, but it's very prevalent. So my whole practice is about finding the root cause, those triggers, just like you do with bone health, right? There are some very common, I call them the usual suspects. We got to throw them into the lineup and see who did it, right? That there are common triggers for thyroid issues. Gluten is the dominant one, but there are others. So it's about running these advanced functional lab tests so that we can cover these areas of investigation, identify where your triggers are. Once we know that data, okay, now we can start to eliminate those triggers. And it's not always about food. Sometimes it's about infections like H. pylori or Prevotella or parasites. Sometimes it's about heavy metal toxicity, right? Or mycotoxins. So, and you may have more than one trigger. Every woman has their perfect storm. right, of triggers. So it's about finding out what your storm looks like and trying to calm that down. Once you eliminate those triggers, okay, now we can start rebuilding the body. And I always look at it as a process of reverse engineering. So we're trying to really reverse engineer your body back to a place where now it has the resilience and vitality to do what it knows how to do, which is to keep you healthy and in balance, and feeling good in your skin. I mean, that's what we all want. So my programs are really focused on two things: functional lab testing and customized protocols, and consistent access. So when people work with me, they have unlimited access to me. In my larger packages, it's unlimited Zoom sessions, whether it's 60-minute, 30-minute, 15-minute, doesn't really matter. Unlimited messaging. If you can get on my calendar, every single day, I'm talking to you every single day. In my smaller packages, it might just be unlimited messaging and maybe unlimited 15-minute sessions, 50-minute sessions, but there's always an element of unlimited access, because you can't plan for crisis, you can't plan for confusion. And when people need the support the most, it's usually not when they're in a session with you, right? I mean, it's usually when they're out living their life. And I'm constantly getting messaged from the grocery store or from a potluck, things like that. So so those are my two focuses when I work with women. And it's predominantly women.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. So I'll have that in the
Sure.
show notes so people
All
can
right.
reach out and learn more about you. Well, Whitney, thank you for coming and sharing this information about gluten with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Debbie. It's so great to see you, as always.
Yeah. Thank you.